we die.
The Last Starfighter had a bit of an ironic life. This movie is all about being plucked from complete obscurity, and in the end, it ended up vanishing into obscurity. If you don't know about the movie, I don't blame you. See, back in 1984, The Last Starfighter was the pinnacle for kids like me who spent their afternoons in the arcade. By those days' standards, the movie had groundbreaking CGI and a cult following that never really died. As years turned, fans like me waited with bated breath for the sequel to finally happen, and well, the sequel never came, until recently. But looking at how long it has been, you gotta wonder, why did it take 40 years to get to the sequel? I've wondered about it too, so let's figure it out together. Since I grew up as a science fiction fanatic, trust me when I tell you that I have looked into the sci-fi landscape of the 80s, and The Last Starfighter brought something entirely different to the table. It was a lot more personal than Star Wars or Star Trek. When I look back to the first time I ever saw the movie, I was completely taken aback by the story. I was a kid, and it felt like I was in that world. And another big reason why this movie is burned into my mind is how real it felt. In the movie, Alex Rogan was a kid living in a trailer park. He was then selected because he was really good at a video game, and I related to that a lot. I think every child has that phase where they want to run away from home, and watching Alex Rogan go on an adventure made me believe that I too could pull it off if I was good enough at the arcade game. I think another reason why this movie stuck with me was because of the life Alex led. Alex lived in Starbright Trailer Park, which was a dusty trailer park where the most hype they ever saw was when a neighbor had a plumbing problem. He had big dreams, but he was stuck in the trailer park. He had no money to fund his big dreams, and I think we've all felt that way at some point in our lives. Whether you are 15, 25 or late 30s, the sinking feeling of, damn, I could have done so much more with my life, just shows up like an unwanted guest. That feeling of being trapped is universal, and like all of us, Alex had an escape. And his escape was the Starfighter game. That was the only thing in his life that felt like a window to somewhere else. And that is why he held onto it as tightly as he did. Can you blame him? The video game is a lot better than being addicted to something else as an escape. So what I'm trying to say is this. The fantasy hook of this movie was one of the purest form of wish fulfillment I've seen in a long time. I mean, we all want to be chosen for who we are, not for our bloodlines, not because my family knows the other family. No, for us, for me. And Alex did that. Alex put in the hours. And when he finally beat the high score, the Centauri showed up. In a way, watching that scene kind of validated every hour we had wasted on something that would be considered a distraction, you know? In 1984, video games were still considered a distraction. They were the thing kids did when they did not want to do their homework. The negative stigma around it was thicker than a bowl of oatmeal, and that is when the movie treated that negative skill as something valuable. It felt like we were all being seen, like all the hobbies that were deemed useless could just end up becoming the one to save the universe. Sure, it was not like the royalty we see in Star Wars, but merit has a bigger impact than royal bloodlines. The message was clear. If you were good enough, you were chosen, and I love that. Standing in 2025, I gotta say, The Last Starfighter actually predicted the gaming culture in an almost eerie way. Let me explain. So in 1984, the concept of video games being used as recruitment tools was such a bizarre concept, no? But now we have actual simulators and specialized games that are used to identify pilots and drone operators. Isn't that cool? The movie was practically decades ahead of its time by suggesting that the games of that era had a particular brand of intelligence and hand-eye coordination that could be used in real-world and outer-world defense. And that little message means a lot because in that decade, games were just toys, but the film portrayed gaming as training. The movie gave gaming as a hobby its worth. The high score of the game was actually a profile of a pilot's potential, which is such a unique way of looking at it. Now, of course, this message kind of went to deaf ears when the movie came out because gaming was not a culture yet. But when gaming became a multi-billion-dollar industry with pro players being treated like athletes, you can tell that the movie was right on the money. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened had the movie come out in the late 90s or early 2000s. Maybe the world would have been a bit kinder to the gamer hero narrative the movie was pushing then, because back in the 80s, computers were still these scary big boxes that were not the center of our social and professional lives. The message of the movie was a gamble, but guess what? That was not the biggest gamble of the story. That would go to the tech. I can't talk about The Last Starfighter without talking about the CGI. Standing in 2025, you could say that there is nothing special about CGI. Everyone uses it, but at the time, CGI was revolutionary. Everyone else was using practical models, hand-painted matte shots and stop motion. Director Nick Castle and his team looked at that landscape and decided that they could do better. Instead of doing any of that, they did everything using computers. They actually used the Cray XMP supercomputer. This was actually one of the first films to rely heavily on CGI for its space battles, which was a big deal. Personally speaking, I have a mixed relationship with the visuals of the movie. I mean, I respect the bravery. They were trying to do something that had never been done before. They wanted to create this sense of scale and movement that went beyond the traditional models used everywhere. However, this was in 1984, and to put it simply, the audiences were not ready for it. People back then automatically associated Star Wars with science fiction, and Star Wars used a very tactile, used universe approach for their movie. So in comparison, the CGI in The Last Starfighter looked like a video game. It lacked the grit that we were used to, and people were not too happy about it. And on top of that, the tech aged fast, like really fast. By the time the last 80s rolled around, the limitations of the CGI used in the movie were glaring. Critics noticed it, and there was no way they weren't going to comment on it. What started out as revolutionary ended up becoming distracting. It looked fake and cartoonish, which is the classic curse of being the first to try something new. The Last Starfighter took all the arrows and walked so that movies like Jurassic Park and Toy Story could run, but because it was so early, it became a punchline for a while. But there is substance behind the smoothness of the textures. I mean, look at the design of Gunstar and Kodan Armada. Look at me in the eyes and tell me they are not cool, because you can't. They are cool. Let's be honest, the biggest judge of the movie is not the concept or the art, it is the numbers. And when you crunch the numbers, you would assume this movie was a total flop. I was in the same boat too, but as I did my research, I realised that the movie didn't actually flop. Okay, so the budget of the movie was around $15 million, and it made a return of $28 million. Pretty good, right? I mean, in today's economy, that would be considered a pretty decent return, but back in the 80s, Hollywood had a different studio system. They were all about stealing money, and of course, unless you were hitting E.T. or Star Wars level of profit, you weren't making enough to pay Hollywood and be visible, you know? And because of that, there was no urgency for a sequel, there was no financial momentum. Universal and Lorimar saw it as a one-and-done project, you know? It had a quiet release, and it performed okay. It was well enough to be remembered, but it was not good enough to be a franchise. And low-key, I don't blame the Hollywood excess. If you look back at 1984, that was an insane year for movies. You had Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Beverly Hills Cop, Indiana Jones, and The Temple of Doom, and of course, The Karate Kid. They all came out that year, back to back, and in comparison to these giants, The Last Starfighter was a small-scale space opera that just got squeezed out. I sometimes sit and wonder what would have happened had the movie been released in a slower year. What if it had more room to breathe, and the audience got more time to really digest the movie and the message before moving on to the next big thing? But that didn't happen, and as a result, The Last Starfighter was a movie that you remember seeing, but you wouldn't go back to the theatre 3 or 4 times just to experience it. But The Last Starfighter was not going to be wiped out. It waited in the shadows, waiting for someone to notice that underneath all of that sheen, there was a story worth watching and loving. And this brings us to why the franchise never actually happened back then. See, usually a movie like this would have an animated series, a toy line, and a lot of merchandise. But for this particular movie, there was no such pipeline. There was a weak push for merchandise because, of course, Hollywood tried to push for merchandise, but it didn't go anywhere. There's nothing captured the imagination like the Star Wars figures by Kenner did. I'm still pissed that we do not have the Gunstar models or Grig action figures. I think it never happened because by the time the studios realised that people actually liked the movie, they had already moved on to the next big cash cow, and investing in The Last Starfighter would be a loss. And then we come to the right situation. This became a nightmare early on. So usually in Hollywood, either one person or one studio holds the key. But in the case of Starfighter, it was split between 2 different entities. Because of that, making a sequel was impossible. Jonathan Betwell, the writer of the original film, actually tried for decades to get all those rights back to a position that would allow for continuation to happen. So while we were waiting for a sequel and blaming the studio for killing the series, the sequel, rather the idea of the sequel, was trapped in a cage. I find that aspect so fascinating. How can the story about this kid breaking out of a trailer park to become a legend end up stuck in the most boring corporate loophole ever? The movie gives us a message that anyone can be a hero if they work hard enough. And then you have Hollywood being like that nerd in class, pushing up his glasses and going, actually that is not possible because lawyers need to agree on a contract. This is what frustrates me the most about the movie. This could have been a massive franchise, but instead, it ended up forgotten and collecting dust on the shelves because it did not go big enough. I've learned from watching the industry that sometimes the best projects get stuck because the numbers weren't numbering hard enough, but hey, this kind of waiting breeds the most passionate fan bases. This is why movies like this become quiet cult classics that people feel protective of. I remember the slow burn of its cult status growing throughout the late 80s and 90s. It was so quiet that you could almost pretend like it was not there, but it was. It lived in the back rows of video rental stores and on late night cable TV rotations. This is where me and millions of others really fell in love with it. We realized that even if the CGI aged like milk, the fantasy of the movie would go hard. The idea that your useless hobby could actually be a secret audition for something great grows only stronger the older you get. And as the numbers grew, the conversation shifted from remember that movie to why hasn't there been a sequel? And this is where I would say that my research started to get weird. See, originally when I delved into it, I thought the sequel was stuck because of a lack of interest, but actually it was trapped in the legal fortress. The rights were a nightmare because even though Universal distributed the film, Lorimar Productions actually made it. In 1989, Lorimar Productions was swallowed by Warner Brothers, and then no one knew who held the rights anymore. And here's where it gets better. Even the heavy hitters of Hollywood couldn't get the rights to this movie. Steven Spielberg and Seth Seth Rogen both tried to get their hands on the rights and failed. Rogen even told the press that Spielberg told him personally that he couldn't get the rights to The Last Starfighter even after years of trying. That blew my mind. The man who made E.T. and Jurassic Park couldn't get the rights to the movie. Was there any hope left for us? Well, as it turns out, yes, there was a little. Because the real twist on why they were blocked wasn't because of the studios at all. It was the original writer himself. See, he held a key piece of the rights, and he'd been vetoing remakes or reboots because he didn't want the story to be erased or simplified. Can't say I blame him, because Hollywood is well known for taking something complex and simplifying it so much that the only similarity is in the name only. Look at World War Z behind the scenes drama if you don't believe me. Now, Betwell chose artistic integrity over quick paycheck, and it held out until he could do a sequel that actually honoured the original story. Finally, there was some life breathed into the series when Gary Whitta, yes, the co-writer of Rogue One, announced that he was teaming up with Betwell to finally bring The Last Starfighter back. I was so hyped when the collaboration news came out. Whitta even released a sizzle reel in 2021 and my mind was blown. It's full of Matt Alsop's concept art showing Alex Rogan passing the torch to a new generation. We were practically at the 1 yard line. The sequel, called The Last Starfighters, was a continuation that acknowledged the 40 years that had passed by. We were so hyped. And then the year turned and in 2022 there was no peep. In late 2022, Whitta admitted that there was a decent chance it wouldn't happen despite their hard work. It was so insane that even with the original creator and a Star Wars writer on board, the story was still not forming, and it hurt extra bad given that legacy sequels are the biggest currency in Hollywood. We saw the return of Top Gun Maverick, Blade Runner 2049 and Tron Legacy, so why not Starfighter? It was time for Starfighter to have its much awaited victory lap. But if I take off the rose-coloured glasses for a second, I have to ask why Hollywood suddenly cares again. Well, here is my theory. I think it is because gaming culture is finally mainstream. Back in 1984, Alex was an outsider with a hobby that was not well respected, but now he is an icon. The idea of skill-based recognition and ordinary people becoming legends via digital simulators is the plot of most of the popular movies in the market. Look at Ready Player One. That is the love letter to the very premise The Last Starfighter created. Even though the movie does not have a sequel, we can all see the shadow of the movie everywhere, and maybe that is why the people at Mad Cave Studios decided enough is enough. It is speculated that they are releasing a comic series in 2026 that picks up directly after the film, giving the universe the expansion that it deserves, even if it is not on the big screen. But here is the thing though, I am scared. I want to see Gunstar fly again, but what if the revival ends up hurting the legacy we love so much? What if they cannot recapture the sincerity that made me fall in love with the movie in the first place? What if the modern take is too dark or too gritty? There is a risk with the sequel. There is a high chance that it would be hollow and miss the heart of the movie, ruining the charm of the movie completely, making a reboot or remake more impossible than it already is. But there is no denying that The Last Starfighter wasn't forgotten at all. It was paused, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. With how relevant the story would seem now, I am hoping that the movie will finally happen, giving Alex Rogan the credit and respect he deserves. If Destiny finally calls again after all these years, should we answer? I know I would, but for now I can rest easy knowing that the Star League is still out there, waiting for a high score. Let me know what you guys think about The Last Starfighter in the comments down below, and I will see you guys the next time.